Welcome to the Podkey Summary of Platform State of the Union from WWDC 2026. Apple's latest developer updates have a pretty clear theme: more AI, more flexibility, and a lot less friction between idea and finished app. The big pieces are on-device and cloud AI through the same Swift tools, smarter Siri integration, faster SwiftUI, and a development workflow that's getting much more agent-driven. There's also a quieter but important shift underneath all of it, with Apple Silicon becoming the Mac baseline and iPhone apps getting more naturally resizable across devices. The foundation models framework is doing something developers have wanted right away, which is multimodal prompts. So now an app can attach an image to a text prompt and get on-device image understanding, including practical stuff like OCR and barcode scanning. That matters because it turns Apple's model story from a text demo into something apps can actually use in everyday workflows. Apple also added a pretty generous cloud angle here. If a developer has fewer than 2 million App Store downloads, they can run Apple Foundation models on private cloud compute at no API cost. That's a meaningful deal for smaller teams, because it offers higher-end intelligence without immediately handing them an infrastructure bill and a migraine. One of the smarter additions is dynamic profiles for language model session. Developers can swap models, tools, and instructions inside a single session, so the AI can change behavior on the fly depending on the context. In plain language, the same agent can stay in one conversation while shifting gears behind the scenes, maybe using one setup for planning, another for tool use, and another for a more constrained answer. These profiles are declarative Swift APIs, and they support on-device and cloud models at the same time. That should cut down on a lot of clunky prompt engineering, and it keeps one continuous transcript across model turns instead of stitching together separate sessions. Apple's lower-level AI story is Core AI, which is basically an on-device runtime aimed at serious model work across Apple hardware. It uses a memory-safe Swift API, supports fine-grained interest management, custom GPU kernels, and ahead-of-time compilation. The practical result is range, compact vision models on iPhone, and much larger language models on the Mac. Apple also included Python-based conversion tools for importing and optimizing PyTorch models, which is important because most research work still begins in that world. So this is Apple trying to bridge the gap between the research ecosystem and Apple's Silicon native deployment, instead of asking developers to start from scratch. Then later this summer, Apple says the foundation models framework will be open-sourced. That means the same Swift APIs used on the client can also run on servers, which opens the door to a much cleaner shared codebase between app and backend. There's also an open-source Swift package, with pre-built tools for skills, context management, and dynamic profiles, which should make AI agent prototyping faster and a lot less lonely. Apple is also making app intents and Siri feel less like separate worlds. With app intent schemas, app content can be exposed to Siri through the Spotlight semantic index. So instead of developers handcrafting a bunch of custom phrases, users can ask more naturally worded questions, like who's coming to origami night, and Siri can understand the app's content model. The new View Annotations API pushes that further by linking visible UI elements to indexed entities. That lets people say things like "send this photo," referring to something on screen, and have Siri act directly on the app. If Apple gets this right, it makes voice interaction feel a lot less like learning commands and a lot more like just referring to what you're already looking at. On the design side, Liquid Glass is getting refined instead of radically rethought. Apple added a darkened edge, brighter highlights, and an opacity slider, so users can choose translucency from ultra clear to fully tinted. The more important part for a lot of people is that these updates respect reduced transparency and high contrast settings automatically, and macOS 27 adds a show borders environment value for more consistent sidebar rendering. There's also a useful change for iOS apps across devices. If an app is rebuilt with the latest SDK, it's automatically opted in to resizability, which means it can expand on iPad and Mac through iPhone mirroring without extra code changes. Apple is also giving developers a resizable simulator, better previews, and even a coding assistant skill to help find common layout problems. And SwiftUI keeps getting nicer in the everyday places. Reorderable containers and swipe actions now work in any grid or stack, which removes a lot of boilerplate for drag and drop and contextual actions. Nested stack layouts can be up to twice as fast, thanks to short-circuited layout calculations, and async image now automatically caches HTTP responses, which should quietly save a lot of redundant network traffic. Swift 6.4 includes a few quality-of-life upgrades that aren't flashy but will absolutely save time. Developers can suppress warnings in specific regions or promote them to errors, which makes incremental migration a lot more manageable. There's also a new Any Apple OS availability shorthand to replace those long, repetitive platform lists, and async calls are now allowed inside defer blocks, which makes cleanup logic less awkward. On the platform side, macOS Tahoe is the last Intel-compatible release, so developers can now ship Apple Silicon-only binaries on the Mac App Store. That means smaller downloads, less testing overhead, and more room for system frameworks to optimize around a single architecture. Then there's Xcode 27, which is leaning hard into agentic coding. It supports the Agent Client Protocol, so compatible AI agents from Anthropic, OpenAI, Google Gemini, and others can plug directly into the IDE. These agents can generate feature plans, write code, look up docs, run UI previews, localize strings, and even submit pull requests. In Apple's framing, you can move from a high-level idea to a production feature in minutes, which sounds ambitious, but the workflow shift itself is very real. And tying a bow on that whole development loop, Device Hub now merges simulator controls with real device control in one place. Developers can rotate devices, capture screenshots, change system settings, and interact with physical hardware from a single pane, with dynamic resizing and high-fidelity rendering built in. That kind of unification isn't glamorous, but it's the sort of thing that makes iteration feel smoother all day long. Taken together, this feels like Apple trying to make app development more continuous end-to-end. One language, one set of AI tools, fewer boundaries between local and cloud, and fewer weird little workflow detours. Some of these changes are flashy, some are deeply practical, and honestly, the practical ones may end up mattering more once the keynote glow wears off. Either way, developers have a lot to play with, and probably not enough sleep scheduled for it. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm. Podkey.